Welcome, everybody, to our newest installment of Bold Calling, how to build a modern sales development team. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are in the world. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into it. We love questions, and we have some fabulous experts here that you should, pick their brains and use the time you have with them. So go ahead and submit any questions you have using the Q&A portal at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the session, we will get to as many of them as we can before we run out of time. But yeah, we definitely want to hear from you. We are recording this session, and I will send it out to all of the registrants by end of day tomorrow, which is Friday. And the thing we always love, where are you in the world? Let us know in the chat. It's always fun to see where people are calling in from. And also like to invite you to join us next month on May 18th for our next installment of Bold Calling. This one will be succeeding as a new sales development manager. So a lot of times, you were the top SDR, they promoted you. Oh my gosh, you're in this leadership position. What do you do? So if that is you, please come. And I'm going to drop the reg link into the chat in just a minute. Oh, great. We got some chats going. Miami, NYC, San Diego. All right. Fantastic. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers for this session. From Orum, we have Patrick, who's one of our managers of customer success. He has held lots of different roles, consulted for over 500 different sales development teams. He's got a beautiful golden retriever that we saw on camera just before we started, so that was great. And you're a golf nut, we also learned, so that's fantastic. So Patrick's going to be leading our discussion, and we have with us two experts. We've got Kevin Hopp, you know him from Hop on Calls and the Call Guys, and also Ronan, who is a co-founder of the Call Guys as well, and I'm sure you've all heard of him before too. So we're so excited to have you guys with us. Thanks so much for spending time and sharing your expertise with us. I'm going to pass it over to Patrick.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, and excited to meet with you guys today, especially this topic of how to build a modern sales development team. Over the last 5.5 years, it feels like I've met with a lot more than just 500 orgs. And I've seen a lot of really good ones and a lot of really bad ones. And one thing that I've noticed about the really good ones is that they're doing a lot of what Ronan and Kevin are doing with their clients today. They're focusing on having the right people, the right process, and the right technology, which we're going to jump into. Before we do that, though, I'm going to kick it off to Ronan and Kevin so they'll have a chance to introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Man, I'm glad to be here. And people from all over the world, pretty cool too. As mentioned, we are the Call Guys, and today we're going to talk to y'all about people, process, and technology, all the fun things that have to do with SDRs, and we'll even get into cold calling a little bit. I don't know. What do you think, Kev?
Yeah, thank you once again, Orum, for hosting this event. This is something that Ronan and I were joking about. We could talk about it in our sleep because we think about it in our sleep. Kind of live, eat, and breathe this. The Call Guys, what we do is we help people build SDR teams and we train SDR teams. Ronan and I have about a combined 20 plus years in sales development, all of it working with B2B tech startups. So we've been on the cutting edge of innovation when it comes to what works, what scales, what doesn't work. We've seen it, we've been there, we've done that, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way. Happy to share a lot of our learnings today and get into how you can build a winning sales development team.
Yeah, and so you bring up what works, right? Obviously, nothing can work unless you have the right people on your team. That's where it all starts. So with your guys' clients and the people you guys consult with and what you've seen over the years, what are you guys looking for? How are you finding these people to fill these seats to build the right team around?
Great question. So let's get into it. We already did the meet and greet. Let's talk about people. I mean, it all starts really with your talent, right? And you can't talk about talent and not start with interviewing. Kevin and I collectively have probably interviewed hundreds of folks. Several of the teams I've managed at any given point had over 30, if not sometimes 40 SDRs. So interviewing was happening around the clock. And you certainly start to pick up on some of the patterns and learn some things from doing that. And one of the first things that I love to start with when we talk about interviewing, it just comes down to the number of times you read these posts or complaints from people who go into a company and they have 16 interviews or like 9 interviews, and it's over the course of like 3 to 4 weeks. So the very first thing is you got to reduce the touch points. We're talking about a sales development rep here. Does not need to be 15 cooks in the kitchen to decide if this person can do the job well. So very first thing we talk about is how many touch points do you actually have in the process? We're big fans of doing things that are also asynchronous, which we'll get into in a moment.
Gotcha. Okay. So having a good interview process, that makes sense. You want to have a good candidate process. Also, you want to guard your time as well. Let's talk about like finding the right people though. Like, what is your like hiring profile? How do you uncover what the right hiring profile is? I'm sure you guys are working with various different types of clients that serve different business verticals and whatnot. Like, how do you hone in on that hiring profile once you start getting people in the door for these interviews?
It's a good question. And I think it kind of leads into one of our other points here, which is a bit about the career progression of an SDR. I think at the most basic level, someone that is getting into an SDR job because it's that front line, that very bleeding edge of the sales organization. My dog feels passionately about this too. You can hear him. Having a career progression in mind for an SDR is really important. So if someone wants to get into sales, being an SDR is a great way to get that career going. But the real truth fact matter of it is, even if someone gets hired as an SDR, the industry statistics are probably only about 60-70% of people actually end up staying in sales. A good portion of the people that start their career in sales as an SDR end up going into a different direction, right? So that means going to customer success, customer support, possibly getting more technical and going back to school to get degrees in something where they can do coding or something on the technical side of the business. So having a really well thought out career progression of, hey, you come in as an SDR at our company, you want to be in sales. In the first 6, 9, 12 months, here is what we reasonably expect of you to be considered doing a good job, and allowing someone at certain touch points to say, hey, this isn't really what I want to do. I don't want to be an AE, but I want to be a CSM. But it needs to make business sense for the business. Of course, they can't just be putting up no meetings and hating their job every day. But if they are performing to a level, you have to enable them to go into a different direction. Then, of course, people who are killing it and really, really leaning into the whole sales development process, what does that look like for them as well? So having a thought out process and not just saying, okay, I need meetings, I need pipeline, let's hire 5 SDRs. That's how you're not only going to get better talent that want to move up at your company, but you're going to keep better talent. And the best way to hire the right people to get promotions is to hire from within, right? So
true.
Yeah, passionate about that.
One thing I would just add to that, I'm curious in the chat, drop if you've ever had this experience. I see Andy just put it in there, having multiple roles within 6 months as they grew fast. But like, who's been a part of a really fast growth company and therefore had a lot of promotion available, that promotion path that just shows up because the company is growing fast. It's one tip to all the folks who are individual contributors out there is you want to find one of those companies where the rising tides are happening fast, because as they say, rising tides raise all ships. So if you're at a company where the growth is happening really quickly, typically the career acceleration will happen faster too. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, you've got the interview process, and Kevin had mentioned, if you're a manager or you're involved in the interview process, one of the things that changed the way I forever was able to identify top talent versus people who might not be the A players that you want is by using a really simple tool that anyone in HR typically knows about called structured interviewing. And the concept is really basic. It's have the exact same question types for every candidate, because what that allows you to do is to compare things evenly too. So going back to just the interviewing piece, and then of course into the career track, you want to keep it pretty standard, right? You want to be able to say, we have a standard interview process. We have a standard career track that we can talk about. But for companies that might not have that career track available because maybe they're not growing as fast, there's a great alternative. You can have milestones. And this is where you really start to see the difference between companies that understand good culture and want to invest in great culture, getting people excited about the role. And so a milestone could simply be like, as soon as you are able to have your name tied to maybe 10 closed won customers, you get a 2K bump in your base salary. As soon as you're able to source X amount of pipeline, this other thing gets unlocked. And it's kind of like a video game. And so the best companies tend to do this.
Gotcha. Okay. So we just unpacked a lot there. So it sounds like in terms of getting the right people, you need to make an attractive place for them to grow. And most people who are looking to start a career in sales or anywhere else is having that career progression, making it an attractive place. That sounds like, great place to start. I know here at Orum, that's one thing we pride ourselves in. Nobody wants to be in SDR purgatory, and you want to make sure you create a place so they don't end up there. And then as far as, interviewing and getting people in, I like what you're saying, Ronen, about having structure. And I'm seeing some questions in the chat here about having, a tough time forming good questions. Once you start to get these candidates in the funnel, like what are some of these questions that, like these structured questions that you're asking when you're interviewing these candidates once they're in the door?
Yeah, that's a really good one. The way to get good questions is to be clear on what attributes you're looking for. So what are the key characteristics? And Kevin and I see eye to eye on almost all of these. But what are the things that you want an SDR to have as part of who they are? And then by having that, you can form questions that dig into the experience or stories of what that person might be able to demonstrate. So one common characteristic is that they have grit. They have thick skin. They could deal with rejection. As everyone knows, the SDR role is so easy that we don't face any adversity. This is a tough role. Like,
That's not true.
Yeah. If I had $1 for every time I heard no as an SDR, I'd be retired.
Yeah, you're rich. You're rich.
And that's the point, right? Like, it's a tough role. So knowing that going into it, you also want to hire for people who have a higher aptitude for being able to handle the toughness of it. But there's a second hack for interviewing that's not necessarily around the questions you ask, but rather the skills that you test for. And this is one that we push a lot with our clients. I've done as well when I was interviewing. Use stress tests. So there's really easy ones you could do, and this is to test people's ability to do a skill. So for example, really simple one, in between interviews, you could say, here's a quick homework assignment. It should take you 30 to 45 minutes. All I want you to do is, using what you know about our company, come up with a profile for a prospect that you would want to go after. Then also craft a cold email, one that you would try to book a meeting by sending that email to the person. And then in a live interview, you could do a role play. So that's a way to do a mock cold call. And you want to test, do they get flustered when I throw objections their way, or do they try to work through it? And really what you're seeking is those core attributes. Are they able to stay cool, calm and collected? Do they have thick skin, or do things start to fall apart?
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, obviously, like in the role, you're going to get like your same, whatever it is, I think like 9 objections, but you're also going to get those unique ones. You need to have people who can think on their feet. So that makes sense as far as applying stress tests. Kevin, are there any stress tests that you apply when you're interviewing some SDRs?
Well, Ronen brought up a lot of the good ones. I am a bit of a fan of having them try to do a bit of a mock cold call, have a bit of that awkward, really like, have they ever made a cold call? If not, are they excited about it? Are they trying hard in it? The other block that I'm going to stand on that a lot of people watching might be like, well, that's not how we do it. I don't believe that you should ask people to pitch what you do, right? Like companies will say like, hey, as part of the interview process, pitch us what we do. And I'm like, man, like that candidate's never going to know what you do better than you guys are. And you're going to find so many ways to poke holes in it. Yeah. If the person's unemployed or they're going for their first job, have them pitch whatever they're passionate about. Pitch why you should be a golfer. Pitch why you need to be, watching Succession on HBO, whatever it is. But make it something that they can actually wrap their brain around and say, okay, I can have a conversation with somebody about this. Not just pitch me what I already do. Companies do that a lot. I feel like it's cheap. It's like kind of it's an own goal. It's like, oh, of course they're not going to do it as well. And it's like, all right, well. Yeah.
I kind of like that because then you can also get a feel of just who they are as a person too. Like, what are they actually passionate about outside of work? That's a really good call out. So let's just, and I want to make sure we get into process here in a second. But let's say you're through the interview process. you stress test them, you've done everything that you guys talked about. Like, how do you close that candidate? How do you get them through the door?
Ooh, closing candidates. So there's a lot of little tactics you could deploy here. I'll share a few of them real quickly. One is that you should, going into it, kind of already ask like, hey, what are your salary expectations? Be very clear about comp. No one likes shady managers who aren't being clear about like what the OTE, the salary, and the commission will look like. So be super clear about it. And if you know you have your winner, someone that you want to go with, one thing I like doing is I already have their cell phone number. So I usually text them, hey, it's Ronen. Wanted to just ping you really quickly. So you've got a few minutes to chat about the update to your candidacy. Now, immediately they're thinking like, oh, okay, what is this? Is this good? Is this bad? I like to keep it somewhat mysterious to create a little bit of an effect. I'm going for like this excitement, because then with the excitement, you want to bring them into what's going to come next. And so usually on the call, I keep it somewhat even keeled the whole time. I'm like, hey, Patrick, I just want to first and foremost say thank you so much for like all the time you spent with us. It's been amazing getting to meet you and everything. Like, it wasn't easy. We talked to some really talented folks. But I'm super excited to share that we're going to be extending an offer to you to join us as a sales development rep. And
Wow.
so
I can almost feel the rejection. I felt like there was a no coming on there for a second.
And like, the reason I do this is because you just want to add a little bit more of enthusiasm and excitement about the role going into it.
Yeah.
And usually people respond with exactly what you just said. They're like, oh, I thought that was going to go a different way. And then there's like, oh, wait, what? All right, I'm so excited. And then you start talking about start date, what else they need to do, because they want to know immediately what's next. So just start talking about, this will be your start date. Does that still work? This is what onboarding will typically look like. You're going to get an email from me. When you get the DocuSign, make sure to review it and get it back to us as soon as you can. If you have any questions, text me, call me. I had this one quick story. I had this one candidate I was chasing because I knew this individual was like going to be good. You can just tell when you see one of those like top notch folks. And he had 3 other offers in hand. And I kid you not, he reaches out to me on a Saturday night. And he goes, hey, I was talking over like this role with my parents and they had a lot of questions. Now, I was out at a bachelor weekend with some good friends and it was already very late. But I wanted this candidate. So I said, call me.
Oh, man.
5 minutes later, we're at the bar. I had to step out. I'm on the phone with his parents, talking to them about some of these technical questions they had because he wanted to run it by them. And then this other thing, long story short, because of that and no one else being willing to do that, to go that extra mile, that extra step, he was super encouraged by seeing how excited we were about him. That was one of the big factors he told me later as to why he accepted. Ended up being a top performer. He made President's Club like 3 years in a row, did really well. And so I have a few stories that are kind of similar to that. But one thing I would say to anyone out there, make yourself available. This is a big decision for the person. Don't just throw it out there and disappear. Be available, check in. People want to feel like you're chasing them too. That's not a bad thing to chase candidates. It's a good feeling that encourages them to want to come over to your organization.
But Ronen, did when he went to President's Club, did he bring his mom or dad? Which one?
That's a great question. Who did he bring?
Were they emailing you for updates? Like, hey, just checking in on Johnny. Did he hit his quota this month?
No, but I did actually meet them later in person.
Cool.
Which goes into management philosophy, but that's a different time.
I like that though. Like, and you're kind of setting a good, by making yourself available. You're setting a good precedent of like what they can expect as far as culture and stuff. Nobody wants an unavailable manager that they're going to be reporting to. Nobody wants like to work at a scare culture. They want to work at a company, where they can feel valued, included, heard. So I really like that you made that call out. And I want to make sure we have enough time to get to the other topics too. Like, and so, we've kind of honed in on like, how do you find a good candidate? How do you get them through the door? Obviously, once you get them through the door, you gotta onboard them, right? And with onboarding, obviously you're going to have processes. And I know this is a pretty loaded topic. I wish we had more time, but like, talk to us about that. Like, once you get in the door, you obviously got to onboard them. You can't onboard them unless you have a good process in place. Like, what does that look like for you guys, especially for some of your customers or clients that are just now building their team?
That's a great question. So we look at process in terms of every part of the SDR's job. What's been really interesting for me in my career is I've worked with a lot of founders and executives that think that hiring a person and bringing that like entry level type person in the door checks the box, and that they're going to carry with like, and it's their job to figure this kind of stuff out, which finding and then engaging your target market. We're of the idea that you should have a process internally, a way of going about the job of being an SDR that is well defined before they even walk in the door. Now, we break this into 3 key areas, and this is all kind of regarding your target market. Think of it that way. You have to define who you're going after, who you want this SDR to book meetings with. If you leave it very broad, you're going to get very broad results. So the more specific you can get, the better. Defining is basically kind of your ideal customer profile, your ICP, narrowing in on not just the types of companies that you want to do business with, but inside of those companies, what types of people do you need to have conversations with? The more specific you can get in defining your ideal customer profile, the more success your SDR is going to have. I think one of the most common problems that we find is there could be a long list. They say, hey, we want you reaching out to CEOs. We want you to reach out to COOs, of course, VPs. Maybe have some conversations with managers too, and then anyone else. Like, just reach out to everybody. That really can be really overwhelming, and it makes the process a lot harder.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And by the way, I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Please keep these coming. We'll be sure, if we don't get to them through this, we have some time set aside at the end to go through those questions. But you bring up a good point in terms of Kevin, that really rings a bell, because I see this all the time, especially with like our customers. We're like, if you have a broad definitions, you're going to get broad results as far as like your personas and the accounts you're going after. And so like for your customers, like, or your clients, how do you help them narrow those personas down? How do you help them narrow down their ICP so that they can understand like who's actually their buyer?
It's a really good question, because especially the earlier stage you are, the harder this becomes. But there's also a pitfall where this happens for later stage companies too, because they think they've already honed in on a very key persona or a key ideal customer profile, and things do change, right? The way that we help people is kind of simple, as all things often become when you do it a lot. What it comes down to is trying to understand 2 big things. If you look back at your data historically, are there any clear signs in terms of industries, size of companies? We look across maybe 10 to 15 different metrics to identify like identifiers for companies as part of the ideal customer profile at the company level. On the persona level, one of the things people usually stop short at is the actual persona. The earlier stage companies tend to not go beyond a decision maker, right? So they don't think about who else can influence this, who might actually be the economic buyer. And if you use Medic as a way to help guide the process, it's pretty clear that in most deals, you'll have multiple folks involved. So we try to call that out and then identify other types of people based on their role, typically by a title, as to what that person's involvement might be in the deal. And what that helps you do is then better define your messaging for those people. Because if you understand who it is and this is part of the engage part at the end of it, if you understand who it is you're reaching out to, you can understand more of their day-to-day challenges. That goes into very niche things like our call scripts or the cold email copy that we write or our strategy on LinkedIn. It's going to change depending on this stuff. So it's really important to come back to it time and time again and make sure it's still aligned with your best looking customer for your product and the problem that you solve.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So really just ultimately understanding your buyer, why they buy, who buys within orgs, what their pain is, and then narrowing that down to the right personas.
Exactly.
That makes sense. So, and I want to make sure we get into the engage part, because obviously, like, that's where a lot of the reps separate themselves, is how they engage their prospects. Like, once you do narrow down this ICP, and find the right personas within them, like, how do you guys go about engaging them? Like, what's that process look like?
It's a great question. We skipped a little bit of the middle zone there, which is finding. And it's funny that it's very common where
Yeah. Sorry,
founders and-
I think of finding and engaging the same thing. So maybe let's take a step back then. And
yeah. So once we define, let's say, okay, awesome. We start out the conversation and it usually goes something like this. Hey, I just need meetings with C-level executives that have an initiative and are in a buying cycle. That's what we need our sales development team to do. And I say, okay, that's fantastic. We're going to find some of those. Realistically, underneath that, we're going to find people that actually live in that painful zone of what your solution exists to solve. Let's go have conversations with them. All right. Now that we know that we want to talk to these people, we need to go find them. And this is like a big problem, right? It's a big problem because you can go to Google and say, all right, cool, I want to talk to mid-market fintech companies based in the United States, under $1 billion, over 50 million in revenue. And you get a list and you go, cool, I got my list of companies. This is all I need, right? Turns out we need to find actual contact information, right? So this is where it gets very, very complicated. And Ronen and I have seen this space change dramatically in the last few years, where it used to be you could subscribe to one database and get access to kind of everything you needed, and it was pretty good. Or you could just have the yellow pages, the white pages, or something similar, right? As cold email and LinkedIn automation has kind of gone through the roof, finding very accurate contact information for folks has gotten more and more challenging. So the act of not only defining, but then finding is having a really thought out process for, okay, I know who we want to go after. Now I know how to identify the companies. Now I know how to identify the individuals inside of these companies and find their accurate contact information. That's a huge piece of this puzzle that allows you to then take steps to engage. Because if you don't have accurate contact information, you end up, hey, I want you to set a meeting with AT&T. Here's 1-800-AT&T.com and info@AT&T. Go sell to them, right? And a lot of orgs like, we'll take that really simplistic approach because they don't understand, because they're not on the front lines of doing it. If I don't have Patrick's cell phone number, if I don't have Patrick's working email address, I'm not going to be able to get to Patrick, right? So having a structured process, and honestly, these days, it's very common to stack data platforms, having multiple data platforms and sources to get accurate contact data that you then use to engage. And Ronen can talk a little bit about our conversation first methodology, which is the way we suggest folks engage with their target market.
And the good news is everything up to this point is set and forget it for the most part. You're not constantly coming back to this. This is a one and done thing. So once you have your ICP and persona identified, you're clear on the messaging for them, you have a system for collecting data and replenishing data to get into new areas, new patches of your territory. That's done. That's the hard part, but making sure that it's systematic is really key. And that's what we help our clients with. We help them make sure that they have it done in a way where it becomes automatic, because the engage part is the part that is continuous. And so getting into that a little bit, and then we could totally pause to take some of these questions that have come in, because I see a bunch of them here. But when it comes down to the engage, Kevin and I have been around the block for some time, and we've seen some of the big changes go from, hey, why don't we spam people with emails and we get decent open rates, decent reply rates. I remember back in the day, over just about 10 years ago, it was pretty common that you would do a mail merge. And a mail merge is like you run a large spreadsheet of names, titles, and it's personalized because I had the person's first name and title, all the things that like Sales Loft and Outreach have become for so many spam cannons. And they're just firing away emails. Well, there was a response to that, like all pendulums, it came back the other way. And the response is now email deliverability is becoming one of the biggest challenges for organizations.
Yeah. I call it the archive reflex. People sniff it out and they just, by reflex, just archive it. Because there's nothing compelling to let them, want to read more.
So exactly. And so Kevin and I are big fans of email, cold email. but not as your first touch point. And we're big fans of social media engagement and outreach, especially if your prospect's very active on social, but not as your first touch point. So our approach is conversation first prospecting, which leverages cold calling. And it's the beauty of being able to speed up your time to market by getting in front of all the people who will answer the phone first. So using technology, which we'll get into in the technology section, like an Orum or a concurrent dialer, you can actually do this super efficiently. And that's kind of the bottom of the tech stack and the bottom of like where the funnel leads to with the entire process. Yeah. But in our conversation first approach, what we're training teams to do once we're working with our clients and engage with them is how to actually generate conversations on a phone or follow up appropriately with email and social in order to get the ball moving forward if it makes sense to have a conversation with them. And we can get into tactics for days if there's interest in that, but I definitely want to pause there because this could go a lot of different directions.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, there's so many aspects of the role. I feel like we could be sitting here talking all day. And data is just, it's such, Kevin was talking about, it's such a key component of the role. Like if you don't have the right emails, if you don't have the right phone numbers, you're not going to be able to engage them. And Kevin talked about like having, multiple providers and whatnot to try to find that contact information. As far as like that process goes, like, cause I know, and I want to get into engage stuff, but like a lot of times when I was a rep, I'd send someone an email or even call them, did all this research. I was super excited to engage this prospect and the phone numbers failed or the email bounces. Like as part of your guys' process, like what do you guys do with that? Like if the phone number fails, you put them in an email only sequence, like what's that look like?
That's a good one. Kevin, you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the conversation first methodology is you prioritize having conversations with people you can have conversations with. Now it sounds kind of obvious, but a lot of orgs take this approach of warming things up, right? Concept that sounds fantastic. It really does. I wish it worked. I really do wish it worked. I wish that if we sent a bunch of emails to people, if we, add them on LinkedIn, it's going to make a huge impact on the outcomes of our cold calls. It really doesn't. So I've found that after doing a lot of scientific trial and error, right? I used to run a company that was outsourced sales development. I had 12 reps calling on about 40 different accounts at one time. Ran a lot of different trials to try and warm up these cold calls. The first thing you want to do is call everybody that has a cell phone or a direct line. Why? Because if you just look at this lead list and you say to yourself, wow, these are people I want to get meetings with. I'd really like to understand what they're doing to solve this business challenge. Go ask them. Go have the conversation.
Yeah.
Most people say, why don't we send an email? They'll tell us if they're interested, right? And it's because they don't have a good process for cold calling. And there's a lot of ego involved in it. And they don't have the right tech, so cold calling takes forever. We kind of flip that whole thing on its head. Instead of emailing everybody and getting that reflex you're talking about, Pat, go have the conversation first. So we highly advocate that you cold call people first, have a good structured methodology for cold calling. And then guess what? We're not just saying you only call. We don't build call centers. We just use a conversation first approach. You have to use the other channels because some people you're not going to have a phone number for. Some people you're going to cold call them and they're going to say like, look, don't ever call me again, but send me an informational email. Cool. I'm going to follow up via email. You meet people in the channel where they're most likely to interact, but the way to get quick results is to lead with the phone.
No, absolutely. Conversations first. I actually just saw an article, I think it was put out by Forbes, where it was like 70% of sales are initially generated over the phone. And it's like you said, through those conversations. And I want to make sure we have some time to get to the technology section, and also have some time for some of these Q&As that I'm seeing in the chat. So thank you guys for putting these in here, and please keep them coming. But I see one here that kind of resonates with me, which is like, so you get your candidate in, you've taught them on the process and everything. Like, obviously there's going to be a lot of coaching involved to try to get them fully ramped up. And even once they're fully ramped, the coaching never stops, right? And so like, for you guys, like, what have you found is like the best way to coach SDRs as they're ramping or even beyond ramping? Like, do you do weekly check-ins? Like, what's that look like so that you can constantly keep a pulse on them to make sure that they're following this process and executing it well?
Yeah, that's a tremendous one when it comes down to culture, because this is going to come back to how people feel. And like they say, people don't really remember what you tell them, they remember how it made them feel. So when it comes down to it, if you give people the time of day and you're making sure to check in with them, especially at smaller stage companies, you definitely want recurring one-on-ones on a weekly basis. So let's say you're out of that early phase where you've done training, you've done onboarding. Now it's like coming down to coaching. Great coaching is usually agenda-less, which means the person coming up to the coaching call is driving it forward with what their obstacles are. Now, the reason that this happens and the reason why this is the best practice is because usually people know how to solve their own problems. They're just looking to socialize it or validate that these are their challenges. And once they get there and they're able to come up with their own solution, not only do they now have the answer, but they've also learned how to get to the answer the next time they have that challenge. So best kind of one-on-ones when it comes down to coaching is learning some of the fundamentals. So how do you do good coaching calls, which is asking some open-ended questions, sort of like a discovery call. And you go into the details of like, what's on your mind? Where does that come from? Tell me more about that. What have you tried already to solve that? What would it look like if, in the future, if it was different? How can you get there between today and tomorrow? And if they're really struggling to come up with an answer, that's when you go, hey, can I give you some suggestions? Here's some things I would try. Which one of those sounds right to you? And then hold them accountable. Between this week and next week, what are some things you can commit to? How can I help hold you accountable? What do you want the deadline to be? Use a send later email, draft it before you walk out of that room with the one-on-one, and have the email go out to check in with them on the thing they just said they would do. That process not only empowers the team to have answers to the questions, answers their questions so they can get past obstacles, it also helps hold them accountable to being the best version of themselves. So I'm a huge fan of using the one-on-ones as time to do personal development in terms of coaching, but it also lets the person on the team know, the SDR, hey, like, I care about you. This isn't just about, where you are on the leaderboard. So make sure that you don't dive right into what's going on with their numbers and their KPIs, but you take a few minutes to check in with the person first.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Like, I mean, it's an emotional job, right? So you got to make sure that they're, feeling good about what they're doing before you can dive into all the coaching and everything. And obviously, coaching, it doesn't stop after one conversation. It's a constant thing. So I like how you brought up bringing the weekly one-on-ones. I'm seeing another question here, and I want to make sure we get touch on the technology section. Obviously, I'm very passionate about that being here at Orum. But I'm seeing Brian in the chat. He's constantly evaluating his costs. He's looking to understand like what benchmarks do you guys look at with the SDR team? Like what financial metrics do you look at to justify the SDR position? Like when do you look to add more SDRs? Like how do you guys consult your businesses on that side of it, where they have to go to finance to justify more SDRs or less? Like let's say finance is saying we might have to cut the team. Like what does that look like? How do you guys evaluate that?
This is a fantastic question. First off, thank you for asking it, Brian. One of the things that was a real turning point in my career is when I figured out that sales development in what I was doing and the way I was doing it was all very front lines. And as soon as I understood the spreadsheet, the business case, the economics behind how sales development should really work, that was a game-changing moment. It was about 3 years ago. So ever since then, I've been helping CROs and executives walk through spreadsheets and build real solid business cases with very conservative assumptions. So two of the things you really want to look for if you're thinking about the economics of a sales development function in general. Number one, I think, should be time. Time should be a huge factor in this, because if you're going to do high growth sales development the right way, it's going to cost a lot. There's going to be costs. We got to have people. We got to have the process, which takes time. And then we have tech, which costs a lot. costs a lot. But we have to look at all of these as a means to accelerate time. Your SDRs and BDRs are doing manual tasks. They're one of the only people at your business that probably are doing manual things. And there is a human element to it that makes it really difficult. So if your SDRs today are going one by one and picking up the phone or typing out emails one by one, and you might think, well, that's their production. Is there a way to accelerate that so that you can get much more results in a shorter period of time? That has to be a key component of when you're looking at the economics of, do I need more sales development reps, or do I need to change what my sales development reps are doing today? The reasonable output of a sales development rep does really depend on a lot of different factors. It's hard to answer off the cuff. But the second thing that I would look for is that reasonable production metric, right? You can benchmark that against industry standards. You can benchmark that against your top performer. But if your SDR team is not producing qualified opportunities on at a reliable clip, then there's a problem somewhere, right? And it's either in the structure, in the enablement, in the training, but you really have to look at the time and the reasonable production.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like, I mean, and I like how you brought up, what the cost, right? Like the cost of doing nothing. Like when you go to justify the business, like if you need more SDRs, like what's the cost if you don't add any SDRs? What's that impact to the business? Versus like if you do bring on more SDRs, like how does that compare? What's the contrast there between those two potential outcomes? And I also like how you brought up reasonable benchmarks. I mean, how many times have you guys seen sales teams constantly raising quota to the point where it's almost unreasonable? You get burnout, people leave. I like how you brought that up. And of course I want to be
sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to dive into that a little bit more in terms of like how you guys identify like what is reasonable. Like I work for businesses that are not work for businesses, but consulted for businesses that have like a lower ACV product. Those SDRs can flip meetings like pancakes. Whereas, I've also consulted for businesses where they sell like a very complex product that requires a lot of thought, and the cost of opportunity is a lot higher. So like, and before we dive into that, I just want to double tap there for the people in the audience. Like, for how do you define what is reasonable?
So, one thing that we'll just put out there, Kevin and I have this incredible model that we've created as well, where we can do this for any company that wants to see their specific numbers, because it does change. So the variables, going back to the original question, that really matter, have to do with your average contract size. That's one of the big ones, right? And then your deal aging, like the typical length of time it takes. So if you think of the sales acceleration formula, those are the things that we look at closely, and we've modeled it out in a way where you can pretty conservatively project exactly what you'll get by adding each SDR head to your pipeline. And based on your close and your win rate, you can predict exactly how much revenue you should get at what point in time. So this stuff isn't wizardry.
Yeah. Understand your math of sales, basically.
Exactly. And we do exactly this with each and every one of our clients pretty early before we start working with them, in order to assess, like, does it make sense to have SDRs? If so, how many? And if you are going with an outbound motion, which one of the various motions make the most amount of sense? How far to the personalization do you want to go? And how far to the volume of automation do you want to go? Because there's a happy place for every company that's slightly different. So anyone who, this is just an open offer, anyone who wants to go through that stuff, feel free to reach out to myself or Kevin. We aren't going to share it publicly, but we'll do it privately for anyone, just because it's one of our proprietary models that we have. We're happy to kind of go through the numbers with you and see what that answer could look like for your organization, for how many SDRs you need to hit your numbers.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys do that with your clients, because at the end of the day, nothing matters unless it backs into your revenue goals. So I'm happy to hear that you guys are doing that for your clients. And you brought up like automation and all this stuff. Like, so let's move it to technology. Like, so you get the people, you get the process. Like now, like, here, obviously you need a tech stack. Like, how do you guys advise your clients in terms of like, how do you build the right tech stack for them?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. So when it comes down to it, we like to keep it simple. I mean, you don't need 17 moving parts and $1 million budget to have a high impact tech stack. The core things you need are right here on the slide for almost all organizations. A central place where everything is going to live, a source of truth, a way to track all the follow-up that has to happen and create some baseline automation, and then also a way to create efficiencies. And that's what we have here: the CRM, the sales engagement platform, and a dialer.
Gotcha. And so, oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just going to add that, what we could also add to this graphic, we probably should, is a line that connects all of them, right? So one of the things that I always find so silly when we sit down with some clients is they say, yeah, we get the CRM over here, and then we got sold this sales engagement platform over here, but they don't integrate. But I really like this guy. I like this feature over here. And then we were trying this dialer, but then we got to export manually from the sales engagement platform to put into the dial. I'm like, life's too short. You can't move quickly unless this stuff integrates. So you got to use best in class tools here, right? The dialer, obviously Orum, you guys have out of the box integrations that just work, and they work every time. I don't know why you really wouldn't look at something that works and integrates, because the flow of information going up and down in this stack is what gives a CRO confidence that you're investing in the right things. And it gives the sales development management the confidence, and it gives the rep the confidence that they're doing the right things, because you can track things. This deal closed one. Well, Johnny made a cold call that scheduled the initial meeting. That was tracked through the dialer, through the sales engagement, into the CRM, right? So make sure you get a stack that integrates is
Yeah,
my big
that
takeaway.
makes sense. Yeah, you kind of triggered me a little bit, because so many times I talk to people where it's like, oh, we'll use this, and this. And it's like, well, they don't, like, how does that work? They don't integrate. And they're like, well, we got to make it work. And it's yeah, so I'm happy you brought that up. So as far as like, because obviously like there's different types of technology and like how to optimize them, like I know there's like sales loft, outreach, all of that. But, I won't go into the nitty gritties, but in terms of like, you want to make sure they get them to integrate, but like how do you get them to like optimize these technologies? Like, I know, for instance, like for Orum's only as good as the prospects you have. Like, if you're only calling 10 people a day, Orum's only going to call 10 people a day. Outreaches or sales loft is only going to email 10 people a day. Like, how do you make sure and advise your clients that they're getting the most out of these investments that they're making?
So this kind of opens up a bit of a can of worms around, do you need all this tech? If so here's you ever heard this one, guys? We operate in a specialized market. We do research before we do our outreach. We don't need all the automation. I don't need all that. I want my reps knowing everything about Johnny before they call Johnny. Okay. We heavily believe in understanding your target market, understanding the business problems of the people that you want to do business with, and the valuable solutions that you have to offer them. But that's pretty much where you should stop, because no matter how much you know about Johnny and his company, if you pick up that phone and call, the industry statistics are 1 in 12 times he's going to pick up.
Yep.
So it's the same amount of effort that you're going to put into that manual dial, but you're going to spend so much more time. Now, once again, time's the variable that we need to optimize for here, right? The time that he puts in, that your rep puts into doing research, he will confuse that with productivity. And so you end up creating a culture with your SDR team of, hey, I looked at LinkedIn and clicked like and commented, this is amazing insight, Steve, on 12 things on LinkedIn, and that's prospecting. And they didn't really have any conversations with people that they can solve business challenges for that day. So
we see that.
We flip that on its head. The idea should be build monothematic lists where I know everyone in this list has a similar persona, similar type company, and my value to them is the same. And then we use automation to just go have these conversations one in a row. And then your follow-up is extremely tailored. Your follow-up is very, take 5 minutes, write that email, talk about what you said. Now we're going to spend some time because we've had that first touch point. But having monothematic lists is probably the biggest game changer that a lot of organizations don't really think about, right?
And you said something that struck a chord with me, which is like, what is actually productivity? Like, it's not just a comment, it's conversations. And that's one thing I just admire about you guys. It's like your conversation first business. Like that's how you generate sales. That's what productivity is. So I really appreciate that. And I want to make sure we have some time to answer some of these questions in the chat. And by the way, if there's anything we didn't go over, please keep these questions coming. If we don't have time, we can be sure to reach out to you. We'll send all our LinkedIn's out, so you guys can reach out to us for these questions. But I see one question here that just resonates with me. You see it all the time, which is, how do you find like the motivation for an SDR, where an SDR is they're just okay with collecting a base wage. So they're not really commission orientated. Like, how do you find what makes them tick and utilize that?
So I got a lot to say on this one. Back in the day, I thought I was going to be a doctor, so I did pre-med. That failed, even though I spent 8 hours a day in the library. And I moved over to psychology, and that's where I started learning a lot of things that I still utilize today. And one of the coolest things about psychology is the positive psychology and the psychology of motivation, which all goes back to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He was like the OG, the founding father of like what motivates us to do anything. And if you just Google hierarchy of needs, you'll find one of the most cited studies that is still to this day being used over and over again to understand what drives people. But it goes so much further. There's actually 4 categories of motivation. All right, you ready for them? First one, we all know very well in sales, extrinsic motivation. And all that means is extrinsic is I do something for a reward. If you have kids like me, you'll learn very quickly. Extrinsic motivations work super well in the short term and super poorly for everything else. So if I want my kid to stop screaming and I say, hey, I'll give you ice cream, he'll stop screaming. But then as soon as he eats the ice cream, he'll start screaming again. So extrinsic motivation, commission can often be that. By the way, money can be any one of these. That's kind of the secret sauce to this, but oftentimes it's treated extrinsically. Then there's intrinsic. This one we also tend to know. This is where we do something because of the joy of doing it. So if you've ever played a sport and you love the sport, I love basketball. You put a ball in my hands, I will have a hard time not going to play hoops. Like I just do it for the love of it. It is so enjoyable. That is the thing we all strive to have in our profession, but very hard to find. So in sales and cold calling, Kevin and I have gotten to the point where Kevin's made over 500,000, maybe closer to 600,000 verified dials. I'm not too far behind him either. So we've gotten to the point where we've had so many conversations, heard so many objections that we relish the opportunity to actually handle objections. I look forward to the moment when I'm live on a conversation. That's intrinsic motivation right there. Now, the other 2 are really important to understand because they help you as an individual unlock yourself. And as a manager, they help you unlock your team. Introjected motivation has to do with the ego, has to do with your self-image. I'm the hard worker. So if I'm the hard worker, I show up at 7:30 a.m. before everyone else does, and I stay till 8 p.m. because that's how I see myself. Now, understanding identity is tough because sometimes you can't even see yourself in the mirror in front of you, but as a manager, this is where you could really help someone on your team. So leveraging how someone identifies and how they believe they are in the world, how they interact, can help them feel motivated when they do something that's not aligned to that. So if you have someone who is, let's say, often talks about themselves as like, yeah, I woke up really early and I did a jog around Central Park, literally had an SDR like that every morning at 4:30, jogged around Central Park, and then ended up in the office at 7.
It's impressive.
So anytime he did something where it was like, oh, dude, you're taking the lazy out here, I'd be like, how does this align with how you see yourself? And he'd be like, yeah, no, I just got to put it in the work. Like I'm a hard worker. So that's called introject. And the last one is identified. This one's often associated with like religion or other values that people have. It's, I value hard work, So I will put in the 100 dials I have to do a day, or be on Orum for 3 hours a day, because I value hard work as a value. Now, it's hard to find these, but the best way to do it as a manager is just talk to your damn team. Ask them questions. Something like, hey, tell me about a time where you just felt like you could work forever. What were you doing? What did you get lost in? That might tell you a little bit about their intrinsic motivation, things they really enjoy. And then you may be able to find a way to connect that into the day-to-day operations in life. And I can go on this forever, but motivation is a big one, and people often stop short at commission. They think it's all about money, but there's a lot more to it than that.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And yeah, the commission check, those feelings only feel good for a few moments, and then it's like, what's next? So, and for those people, because you're talking about like intrinsic motivation, all the other type of motivations, like, how do you get that aligned to like their goals and their quota? Like, obviously that's why they're here. And you want to fulfill, what fulfills them as people, but at the same time, like, this is a business. So how do you get that aligned with the business's goals?
That's where you have to have these real conversations in a one-on-one setting and say, tell me about yourself, learn who they are, and then find the connections. Start to put 2 and 2 together. Here's the business needs, and here are your needs. And if the more of these connections you can make, it doesn't just have to be 1 or 2. If you can make multiple connections to what the company's trying to achieve and what motivates this person, you'll ultimately find some paths that you can lean on as a individual or as a manager to say, like, this is the thing to get me going. This is what I really love. So for example, if someone is the high achiever, maybe they were firstborn and they're used to, having a lot of expectations from their parents and friends and family. Maybe promotion path matters a lot to them. Like, they want to see that every 6 to 9 months, they got a promotion. We've all met that person, right?
Yeah.
Guilty. And like,
Same.
that, and like when you meet that person, so talk about like, okay, what's the next thing on your mind? Like, where do you want this promotion to get to? Great. Let's come up with what you have to do to get there. And that's where the business goals fit in.
Yeah.
That's where you slide them right in. And now as a manager, the good ones are going to be able to make it real. They take that to someone who has authority and can say, we're going to make this a real path for the person. The bad ones, well, you guys know the story there.
Yeah, no, yeah. I always feel like the best way to manage is like you're sitting next to them, not across from them.
Well said.
Because then you feel you're not in alone. They actually care about your goals and your promotions and things of that nature. So I appreciate you bring that up. And I know we only got 1 or a couple minutes left here, and I've been saving this question because I don't know. It just resonated with me. But going back to like interviewing, finding the right people, like, what's that one question, or like, if any, that you wish an SDR asked like during an interview? And it doesn't have to be that. Maybe it's something like where they impressed you too with, like, during their pressure test, like during one of their mock exercises. Like, what's that one thing you just wish you saw during those interview processes?
Don't back down. For doing objection handling during a mock call, just take your best shot at it. It doesn't have to sound good. I don't expect you to sound good. You're not trained yet, but don't back down. And the second one is, know where you want to be heading. Even if you're not certain about it, make sure that you sound really certain about it. So know the answer to where you want to be in the 1, 3, 5 years, because that's what we want to hear when we're hiring people. I want to know that you're going to stick in sales, because that'll tell me you're going to be a good fit for this role.
That makes sense. They got to have the grit, determination.
I would also add real quick that some of the best SDRs that I've ever hired asked during the interview process, they said, how will you know that I'm not a fit for this role 30 or 60 days in? And they kind of asked about like what goes wrong commonly. And they're trying to like place themselves and what they know is their strengths into, is that going to align with not just success, but common failure? A lot of people ask, like, what does success look like? And, how do I do good? And what's my quota? But asking what failure looks like, so they can say to themselves, am I going to be a failure or not? That's been kind of an X factor that I've seen some SDRs do.
Yeah, got it. Well, I'm sorry we're up on time, but I really appreciate those points. And I see Alfred asking about Orum giving a special offer for over 500 dials. I'll lean on Laura there, but what I can say is we do 2-week trials with any company who's interested. So if you guys are interested, please feel free to reach out to myself or Laura, and we can get you in touch with the right people. So you can try Orum out with one of your teams. But
and it's fun. It's fun. If you haven't tried it, get in there because it is a really fun thing. The first time you're like, whoa, this is flying. I'm talking to people left and right.
yeah,
Awesome.
exactly. It's so nice. You don't actually have to sit there and wait an hour to get one connect. It's pretty fun. And we have a bunch of other stuff that makes it more fun too. So you can call alongside your friends if you're in a remote environment. But anyways, I really appreciate the time today. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to all your questions.
Patrick, thank you so much. Yeah, Laura, you guys are the
Yeah.
best.
I
Thank
really
you all.
appreciate the time for you, Ronan, Kevin. Had a blast. And
And
Yeah.
I will be sending out this recording by end of day tomorrow for everyone that registered, so you can watch it back and watch get all these great nuggets again. Thank you so much to everybody for all your great questions. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. This was fantastic. Have a great day, everybody.
Take
Bye,
care.
all.
Thanks for having us.